Services and Global Opportunities and the Creative Innovative Economy. Co-chair, I'm here with co-chair Councilman O and Councilman Dom. We're not going to have long speeches before we start because we know we're here to look at the ability for the city of Philadelphia to grow out an infrastructure necessary to grow the EV use in our city, looking at all the expertise and also look at technologies that are used throughout not only our country but throughout the world, and how we could then put a plan together within a year to make this happen. So without further ado, Matt, if you'd like to read the first panel, and let's get started. Thank you.
Councilman, you want the resolution name? So Resolution 161039, a resolution authorizing Council's Streets and Services Committee and Committee on Global Opportunities and the Creative Innovative Economy to hold hearings regarding the installation of electric vehicle parking spaces in Philadelphia. The first panel is Christopher Pachalski.
Chris, just state your name and then proceed with your testimony.
Yeah, hi, my name is Christopher Pachalski. Go ahead and read my testimony. So thank you for the opportunity to give testimony today on the promotion of electric vehicles as part of a sustainable transportation system. I'm the Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives at the Managing Director's Office of Transportation and Infrastructure Systems, also known as OTIS. Recent advancements in electric vehicles have brought this technology into the mainstream. While the original legislation by then Councilman Kenny was an important stimulus, the technology has moved so fast that now is a good time for a moratorium to review our electric vehicle policies. Otis and the Streets Department look forward to working with other members of the administration and council during this brief moratorium to examine, as stated in the mayor's letter to council dated April 20th of this year, the behaviors and needs of drivers and EV owners, the changing technology of EVs and EV charging infrastructure, potential incentive mechanisms, various models used for integrating EV infrastructure into the transportation network, best practices for EV parking wayfinding. While examining these points and others, the task force suggested by the mayor should keep in mind the optimal place of electric vehicles in a larger mobility strategy that promotes equity, sustainability, and safety. Promoting the wider adoption of electric vehicles, especially when they are powered by renewable energy, is important. Equally important is the promotion of inherently clean alternate modes of transportation, such as transit, walking, and bicycling. These modes are also safer than electric vehicles, which contribute just as much to fatalities on our roadways as conventionally powered automobiles. Otis looks forward to partnering with council to find a holistic EV strategy that fits comfortably inside a larger mobility framework. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on resolution number 161039. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Chris, thank you so much for your testimony. I just have a couple questions before. Moving forward, as we create this task force to come up with this plan, now we know people from Otis, somebody from Otis would like to be involved. Is there any other departments? I was thinking if we look at the growth of this through sustainability, somebody from sustainability to be involved, and also L&I, because if we look to grow features in electric vehicle chargers, or maybe we add things to the building code, so all new developments that have parking, maybe percentages and allotted for charging. If we could get a list from you to the chair, to people who you think in the administration who would like to be a part of this task force, so that we could put that together, working with you, and plus some of our stakeholders that are here today, to come out, because really, I mean, if you think about it, a year, it's not a real long time.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure we have all the players, stakeholders necessary to make this work. And we also want to be able to put something in place and a plan in place that we could start. We would have some short-term reachable goals right away and some long-term goals that we could then be able to show as we move forward, where we're going to be maybe 5 years from now as we move forward. So if you could get that list to us, I think it would be great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I think one other part of the administration that should be on the task force is fleets. So I think they have a
fleet.
Yeah, they have a part to play. But I'll see if there's anybody else and get you some names.
All right, thank you very much. Councilman O?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony. We have discussed, Councilman Squilla and I, and looking for the input of the administration, the support of the administration on two matters. One is the complaints we have had before the moratorium and during the time of the moratorium is that PPA does not tow vehicles that are in violation of the reserve space. And so we thought it would be a good idea to speak with PPA about creating a number, a constituent service number, so they could, EV owners could report vehicles that are in violation for towing. Mm-hmm. So rather than kind of assigning that to enforcement officers, just directly contact the tow drivers. The second thing is that I'll be introducing a bill along with Councilman Squilla to increase the penalty for vehicles that are parked unlawfully or improperly after 6 p.m. in the EV spaces. That hopefully will also encourage, the vehicles from not being in those spaces during the time from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And so certainly we look for the administration's support on those two matters.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. I have a question for you, Dr. Pachelski. Have we as a city looked at the opportunities in electric vehicles in the police department, trash compactors or sanitation trucks, all the vehicles that we use as a city in fleet management, and seen maybe we could do an analysis as to cost of how we're operating now versus with electric vehicles and what the payback is? Because if we're going to do something like this, it would be nice to see the city taking the lead with its own vehicles and converting.
Okay, I don't know off the top of my head if there's, but I think that's a reasonable part of what the task force should look at is the cost and the payback period.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I know SEPTA is also looking at this, and there's a couple buses that are now coming online in the summer that will be electric buses. So I think we are going there, and as technology changes and the batteries last longer, I think we'll be able to do more and more of this as we move forward. So is there any other questions for this panel? Seeing none, Chris, thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Matt, would you like to read the next panel?
Tom Bonner, Robert Graff, and Karen Pacey.
And before you start, just would like for the record, we have your written testimony. Just state your name and then your position. And if your testimony is real long, maybe if you could summarize part of it to get to the main points. And then we'll try to wait till all you are done with your testimony before we ask questions, if that's all right. So if we want to start with Tom, you're first, then Robert, and then Karen. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Squilla, Chairman O, and members of the committee for inviting me to testify today on behalf of PECO regarding the challenges and opportunities in transportation electrification for Philadelphia. My name is Tom Bonner, Energy Policy Manager at PECO, and I work to coordinate the company's legislative and regulatory strategies with business approaches that will enable us to meet the emerging needs of our customers and communities. At PECO, we believe transportation electrification represents a unique opportunity for the Philadelphia region to improve our economy and our environment while delivering a better quality of life for all. But providing this access will require an integrated plan that serves the needs of those who purchase EVs, those who drive conventional vehicles, and those who walk, pedal, or ride public transportation to bring these benefits to all of our neighborhoods. This can be a challenge because most EV owners charge their vehicles at home, and where owners have their own garage, that's cost-effective and convenient. However, where they don't, we need to think more creatively about how we provide charging access. The increasing focus of environmental sustainability and the dramatic improvement in the price, quality, and variety of vehicles, electric vehicles that are available today, do demonstrate to us that this is something we need to be working on. There's no path to dramatic greenhouse gas reductions that don't involve significant transportation electrification. The US DOE estimates that an all-electric vehicle produces 66% less emissions than a conventional vehicle, and a hybrid vehicle, it's about 50% for a hybrid plug-in. And as ranges get better, the numbers for the hybrids continue to improve more toward the all-electrics. Electric vehicles, including buses, also remove ground-level emissions and noise from our neighborhoods, improving public health and quality of life. The range and affordability of these cars is rapidly improving. Consumer Reports currently list 23 models of plug-in electric or all-electric vehicles available for sale in the United States, and these are no longer just small subcompacts. They now include minivans and small SUVs as well. When the Chevy Volt was introduced in 2011, it had an all-electric range of 35 miles and a sticker price of $40,000. Today's Volts have a range of 53 miles and a sticker price of $34,000. And for a few $1,000s more, later this year, the Bolt will come online with a 238-mile range for just a couple $1,000s more. Addition to that, there are federal tax incentives, $7,500 for EV purchases, and Pennsylvania offers a $1,750 rebate. And some manufacturers, including Nissan, are currently offering an additional $10,000 incentive for customers in our service territory for PICO. So while the initial purchase price is still generally higher, you do need to take into consideration what we call total cost of ownership, which includes fuel savings and maintenance, which are significantly cheaper for an electric vehicle than a conventionally fueled vehicle. So these are not just a kind of upper market option anymore. They're increasingly available to customers in all price ranges. By 2020, the firm that did this work for us, Accenture, estimates that's going to grow to 21% favorability. So this really can be an economically good choice for the customer if they can get access to the charging. At PICO, we've tried to take a measured approach. We don't believe in spending a lot of public dollars or ratepayer dollars ahead of the market, but we also believe you have to plan infrastructure a bit in advance when it's going to be needed. We've checked our system. We can accommodate any reasonably foreseeable level of EV adoption without creating any problems on our grid. We've worked with the DVRPC to map and model where we expect concentrations of EV owners to come online in the next 10, 15 years. I guess our initial analysis is really for 10, and we're looking at a longer term analysis. We're also looking at where will these people live, work, and play, and that's the key question. And the live really tracks with your level 1 long-term chargers. The work and play is the level 2, where folks are going to stop for 2 to 3 hours. And then what are the corridors where you will need that emergency charging and the backbone infrastructure that probably tracks with the fast charging. And that's the analysis we need to do. Rob will talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done collaboratively with the DVRPC. And I'll also mention we've done work on educating our customers about this opportunity. We believe the time's right to do more, and we've hesitated, we've watched the market, we've tried to learn and not get too far ahead, but we see a lot of developments that are important. The Volkswagen settlement is bringing $118 million into Pennsylvania. There's also, they've designated this as one of their direct investment areas, where Philadelphia is one of 11 metropolitan areas for an additional $40 million of direct investment. And Governor Wolf has launched an EV infrastructure task force that a number of us who are testifying here today are part of. We were also very pleased during the DNC to collaborate with SEPTA on their EV bus demonstration, and I believe they're bringing on 25 buses later this year, and we continue to work with them trying to identify the most cost-effective way to do their charging. So in order to get this right, the city, other local governments, transportation analysts, utilities, and industry experts need to develop an integrated regional plan. We've worked with stakeholders to develop a legislative proposal that would require the state to set a goal for electrification expansion, and then require utilities to work with a broad range of stakeholders to develop what we call the regional frameworks. Basically, how much charging infrastructure will be needed by 2030 and where it should be located. We would sponsor these frameworks and then submit the required investment by the utility, where we believe, because of our long-term investment horizon, we can make those type of long-term investments to our Public Utility Commission for recovery. We're pleased that Representative Marguerite Quinn of Montgomery County has announced her intention to introduce legislation based on this proposal, and we hope to work with council, the city, and other stakeholders to help promote it, because we do think it's the best way forward. In terms of VW, we think the $4 million direct investment, well, approximately $4 million direct investment, could be best used to look at some neighborhood pilot solutions. Look in those areas that are most impacted by the number of applications for the curbside chargers, and then also those owners and potential owners by the moratorium. Let's pilot some things, see what can work, looking at things like neighborhood charging pods or charging access along public buildings, parks, schools, et cetera, where it may not have the same kind of gut reaction as my neighbor has one of these spaces in front of his house. Why can't I get my own space? So if you put it in a public neighborhood access point, that may go over better. Longer term, part of the EV investment, we think the highest opportunities are actually in some other areas, such as the port, airport, and transit charging. But we do think if you have successful pilot applications with the with the local VW dollars, you can look to use some of the national dollars to begin taking those to scale where they're needed. So in summary, we thank you for the opportunity here today. We've really looked forward to a long-term engagement with the city and other stakeholders on how to make EVs in the city work. And we think that requires a partnership of a whole lot of parties, and we appreciate your leadership in bringing this issue forward.
Thank you, Tom, for your testimony. I guess we want to, Robert, if you want to, Mr. Graff.
Sure.
And I know you have a long testimony here. If you could just summarize some of it, or do you want to read the whole part?
It's less than 4 pages, so I'll try to just read it because I haven't prepared a shorter summary.
Okay, all right, great.
Good afternoon, I'm Rob Graff. I manage the Office of Energy and Climate Change Initiatives at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, DVRPC. We are the metropolitan planning organization for Greater Philadelphia, including Philadelphia and its 8 surrounding counties. It's my honor to have been invited by Councilman O to participate in today's City Council Joint Committee hearing before the Committee on Streets and Services and the Committee on Global Opportunities and Creative Innovative Economies. DVRPC is honored to have Councilman Squilla designated to represent the City of Philadelphia on our board. I'm here to present testimony under Resolution 161039, which authorizes hearing regarding electric vehicle parking spaces in Philadelphia. My work at DVRPC has enabled me and my colleagues to be engaged for the past 7 or 8 years in the discussions and research surrounding electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging stations. I've brought copies today of our report, Ready to Roll, Southeastern Pennsylvania's Regional Electric Vehicle Action Plan, also available on our website. I also serve as the co-chair of the Charging Infrastructure Committee of the Pennsylvania Electric Vehicle Coalition that Tom mentioned. My understanding is that these hearings are taking place to help City Council as it begins to formulate city policies that might facilitate the charging of electric vehicles in the city. In his letter dated April 20th that accompanied the moratorium legislation allowing it to become law, Mayor Kenny stated that during the moratorium, the city needs to study the issues surrounding electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging and to begin to develop appropriate policies to address these issues within the broader context and needs of the city, concerns of city residents. DVRPC will be happy to offer whatever assistance the city needs as it carries out this research. I will first provide a few basic facts about electric vehicles because I think that's really important to have some understanding of that first. Then I will discuss what DVRPC has learned from recent discussions with officials in other U.S. cities. I will conclude with a few recommendations. It's important to start with a few basic facts about electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging. Policymakers need this information to understand how best to develop policies to address the needs of the vehicles, their owners, and the residents of the cities. To keep this portion relatively short, I have simplified the issues. The end of my testimony has some key documents that provides additional detail. The term plug-in electric vehicle covers a very wide range of vehicles that use an externally charged onboard battery and an electric motor for some or all of their power. The battery is charged by plugging the vehicle into an external source of electricity. Plug-in vehicles vary widely in how much power the electric motor provides. Some plug-in electric vehicles have a gasoline engine as well to supplement the power of the electric motor when needed or to provide all of the vehicle's power when the battery is depleted. These are called plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Some plug-in electric vehicles have only a battery and electric motor and run only on electricity. These are called battery electric vehicles or all-electric vehicles. The all-electric range of any plug-in vehicle depends on the size of the battery. A battery costs roughly $100 per all-electric mile. That is, a battery for a vehicle with a range of 2,000 miles costs roughly $2,000. Manufacturers balance electric range with vehicle cost when designing their vehicles. The all-electric range of plug-in hybrid vehicles goes from under 10 miles for early models of the plug-in Prius to over 50 miles for the current Chevy Volt. However, a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle can continue to travel using its traditional gasoline engine when the battery is depleted. A Chevy Volt, for instance, has a total range of 420 miles with a full battery and a full gas tank. The range of plug-in all-electric vehicles goes from a low of about 80 miles for so-called limited range all-electric vehicles to up to 335 miles for the luxury Tesla Model S. The Nissan Leaf has a range of just over 100 miles. Electric vehicles have several attributes that make them highly desirable for personal transportation. For the consumer, electric vehicles can be a joy to drive. They have high acceleration rates, drive smoothly, are very quiet, and can be fueled at home for much less than the cost per mile of gasoline. From a public goods standpoint, electric vehicles do not produce tailpipe emissions while they are using only electricity. They are, however, responsible for a certain level of emissions associated with electricity generation. It should be noted that electric vehicles, just like any car, cause congestion, take up parking spaces, and can hit people walking, riding bicycles, or driving. In addition, they do not pay the state and federal gasoline taxes that help pay for the roads they use and for other transportation needs of the city. Of course, a plug-in electric vehicle, or PEV, needs a place to plug in. The speed of charging depends on the type of charger used. Charging at home and in most other locations, such as shopping centers or parking garages, is typically done with either 120-volt electricity, like a lamp or television uses, or 240-volt electricity, like an electric clothes dryer uses. A PEV can add about 5 miles of range per hour to the battery when plugged into an 120-volt charger, and up to about 15 miles of range per hour if connected to a 240-volt charger. A National Research Council study from 2015 reported that between 97 and 98% of all charging by PEV owners takes place at home or work if these options are available. Faster charging times are possible, but these require voltage and power levels that are not readily available in residential areas, require very expensive charging equipment, and are not practical to serve as the primary way to charge PEVs, although they may be appropriate for occasional special uses such as emergency charging or charging for long-distance interstate trips. Note for comparison that a standard gasoline pump delivers up to 8 miles or up to 10 gallons per minute, equivalent to a rate of about 15,000 miles of range per hour. DVRPC's most recent household travel survey found that on a typical day, 80% of all cars in our region travel fewer than 50 miles. Thus, driving an electric vehicle with home and or workplace charging is feasible for many drivers in our region. For people who have a dependable place to park at home or work where they have access to electricity, electric vehicles are easy and inexpensive to fuel. The situation for charging electric vehicles is, as you know, quite different for those who do not have a dedicated parking spot. In February 2012, as part of our research for the Regional Electric Vehicle Action Plan, the DVRPC held what we called a garage-free electric vehicle summit, where we brought together attendees from Baltimore, Boston, Cambridge, New York, Greater Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., as well as representatives of EV charging manufacturers, utility industry, car share industry, and EV manufacturers, including General Motors, Nissan, and Tesla. I would suggest that write-up of that summit, included as an appendix to DVRPC's Electric Vehicle Action Plan, would be a useful start for the city's research in this area. More recently, DVRPC gathered information from 9 U.S. cities about how they handle electric vehicle charging for their residents. We spoke with representatives from San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, and Berkeley, California, and gathered documents from Los Angeles, San Jose, Chicago, Pittsburgh, and New York City. With one exception, none of these cities provide or permit private installation of on-street electric vehicle charging in residential neighborhoods. That one exception is Berkeley, California. At the beginning of 2015, Berkeley started a 3-year residential curbside electric vehicle charging pilot program. This program permitted residents of all types of housing, including single-family, duplex, multifamily, to install chargers at the curbside only in situations where the city deemed off-street parking was not available or feasible to build. The program was available for the first 25 installations and covered the permitting costs for installing the charger. Prior to starting the program, Berkeley officials contacted officials in Philadelphia to learn about challenges that Philadelphia has had with its curbside electric vehicle charging program. To avoid problems Philadelphia faced, Berkeley chose not to provide any signage or parking limitations with the spaces where curbside chargers are installed, and parking is not limited to electric vehicles. Because of this, those choosing to install curbside charging only do so in situations where they are quite confident they will be able to park in front of their house on a regular basis. Such a system might work in those neighborhoods of Philadelphia where on-street parking is readily available. The population of Berkeley is about 120,000, and they had over 1,100 registered plug-in electric vehicles in 2015. In 2015, the city of Philadelphia, with a population of over 1.5 million, had 188 plug-in electric vehicles, only 71 of which were all electric. Berkeley is over 2 years into this program and has only had 5 residents install chargers. In addition, city officials permitted 2 additional installations on private property by creating off-street parking through zoning flexibility. The current thinking in Berkeley is to not renew this pilot program. Portland, Oregon has no plans or desire to provide private electric vehicle curbside spots in front of private residences. Portland has established a transportation hierarchy that informs all of their decisions on transportation. The highest priority is walking, followed by cycling, transit, other shared vehicles, and only then by zero-emission vehicles such as electric vehicles. Other private vehicles have the lowest priority. Portland does not want to implement any policies that encourage private automobile use in the city. San Francisco has a general policy to discourage private vehicles. They noted that electric vehicles have the same problems as other vehicles except for lower tailpipe emissions. However, EVs are not the most cost-effective way to reduce urban air pollution. San Francisco has no mechanism for or interest in providing for on-street charging of residents' electric vehicles. However, these and other cities do have programs to help make chargers available for those who need them. Portland's policy is that public charging stations should be sited in those areas of the city which are currently not well served by other charging facilities, have low access to transit and cycling facilities, are at multifamily buildings, are home to low income and other disadvantaged populations, and at workplaces. However, the city itself has no plans to install charging facilities, leaving that to the marketplace. In general, Portland does not want any charging in the public right-of-way. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power started a pilot program in December 2016 to install up to 5 charging stations on utility poles with use limited to 4 hours. The Los Angeles Department of Public Works has installed dozens of curbside electric vehicle chargers using the electric wiring on streetlights. These are operated by ChargePoint, and users pay a fee of about $2 per hour to use them. Other cities have similar programs where private companies offer charging for a fee. For some EV owners without their own charging stations, these may serve their needs. However, they are generally best suited for an occasional user. An EV owner needs to have a regular, dependable place to plug in, either at work or home. So what solutions are there other than privatizing the public street for on-street dedicated EV charging? First, private off-street parking is available at a cost in most of the areas of Philadelphia where on-street parking is tight. EV owners could rent or purchase a parking space. With sufficient demand, the market can provide such spaces with EV chargers. The city can help facilitate the permitting and installation process. For example, the city can make changes in laws and regulations to facilitate overnight use in private parking lots for electric vehicle charging. For instance, a store that is closed overnight could be permitted to install an electric vehicle charger and restrict parking to paid customers who would be charged by that business or department. City could advocate for changes in the building code to require new buildings to provide electric vehicle charger-ready parking. This means that a certain portion of new parking spaces would be required to have conduit installed to facilitate easy installation of electric vehicle chargers. Make changes in laws and regulations to make it easy for building tenants to have dedicated parking in a shared lot that would be accessible to electric vehicles for charging. Explore opportunities for overnight parking and charging at city or school district-owned lots with appropriate fees, time restrictions, and penalties. As you may know, the VW Zero Emissions Vehicle Settlement will bring about $4 million for electric vehicle charging infrastructure to the region. I forwarded the mayor's letter to the head of this program at VW with a suggestion that they use some portion of that money to pilot something for residents of Philadelphia. DVRPC is ready to assist the city as it works to address this challenge. Research questions that merit addressing include: what is the current availability of on and off-street parking in the different areas of Philadelphia at different times of day? What are the legal and regulatory barriers for establishing dedicated off-street parking spaces with EV chargers in different types of parking facilities? such as individual spaces, commercial lots, and government lots, with different types of time restrictions? And what cost are EV owners willing to pay to charge their vehicles? I'd be happy to take any questions you might have, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We're going to hold the questions until everybody's done. I guess, Ms. Karen, if you'd like to just state your name for record and give your title and proceed with your testimony, then we'll ask questions to the whole panel.
Absolutely.
Before you start, I'd just like to recognize Councilman Green present at the hearing also. Thank you.
My name is Karen Pacey. I'm here on behalf of Enterprise Holdings. I oversee our Enterprise Car Share division here in Philadelphia. Back in August, or in 2011, the U.S. Department of Energy announced that it would be providing funding through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act to accelerate the development and production of electric vehicles in order to reduce petroleum consumption. To encourage the adoption of EVs, the DOE had undertaken the deployment of a large EV charging infrastructure in several cities, and one of them being Philadelphia. This program was known as the EV Project. I worked directly with the Mayor's Office of Sustainability throughout the project. There were 22 charging stations that were placed in Philadelphia throughout the project. Philly Car Share, which was a nonprofit operating in Philadelphia at that time, arranged the partnerships with the properties that were charging stations were installed. The partners were Temple University, University of Pennsylvania, Parkway Corporation, and the Philadelphia Horticultural Society. The charging station partner was Blink. Enterprise Car Share acquired Philly Car Share in August of 2011, and we agreed to continue with this initiative. We purchased the 22 electric vehicles, which were Chevy Volts, to place at the EV stations and promote the usage of the vehicles through our member base, as well as through several other marketing initiatives to promote the vehicles and encourage usage from our members. Electric Transportation Engineering Corporation, doing business as Ecotality in North America, was selected by the DOE as the project manager for the EV project. Ecotality collected our data along with the other cities' data to evaluate vehicle use and charging patterns in a variety of topographies and climate conditions, as well as the effectiveness of the charging infrastructure deployed under the EV project. The collection and analysis of this data was gathered to support the expansion of the EV infrastructure into our regions. We encountered challenges as a company due to the fact that the vehicles, the electric vehicle Chevy Volt, cost twice as much as my normal vehicle cost. Members were excited about this initiative, but proved that they would not travel to the EVs or pay a higher hourly cost for the vehicles. We rolled out the EV program with an introductory low hourly rate at that time of $4.50 per hour, and we did end up keeping that low rate for most of the 2-year program, and we still did not experience increased usage or enough usage to support the vehicles. We experienced challenges with members not charging the vehicle for their next member, as in car share, that member that returns the vehicle is responsible to plug it in, so when the next member got there, it would be fully charged for their trip. Thus, the next member that arrived at the vehicle had a very unpleasant experience. We also experienced the charging cords being stolen, and they came at a very high cost, so we had to pull those, and they were not available to those utilizing the vehicles at the time. We had to store them in our office. Overall, these vehicles were too costly, and placing the responsibility on our members to charge the vehicles resulted in many negative experiences with our following members. After the 2-year agreement, we did remove the electric vehicles from our fleet, but as I look back on it, the very positive part of it is that the 22 charging stations were granted to the partners with us where we parked the vehicles and placed them. So we left with the 22 charging station infrastructure in Philadelphia at the end of the project.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. So those charging stations are still there currently?
Yes, I do believe that some of the ones in Parkway have been removed, but I know at the universities, they are still there, and at some of the Parkway locations.
Well, hopefully we can keep them there for now until we figure out how to reuse them and make them accessible to others. I have just a quick questions, and I'll go to my colleagues. First of all, Mr. Bonner, I'm sure PICO would be interested as being part of this task force as we move along in DVRPC to help Philadelphia come up with this. Would you be the person that would be?
I think I'll be your initial point of contact, and we have a small team that's been working on EV issues for a number of years, but we would be very excited about participating and helping the city craft a path forward.
And I know you mentioned that there's legislation being introduced, or hopefully it hasn't been introduced yet.
It has not been introduced. Representative Quinn has issued what's called the co-sponsorship memorandum announcing her intent to introduce. It's still, because it's fairly novel piece of law that's being written, there's been a lot of back and forth with the legislature's attorneys on some of the details. We expect that to be completed any day now, but I've been saying that for a couple of months, so.
We know how
Take that
complicated
for what
that
it's worth,
is.
yes.
Especially in Harrisburg at this time. I'm sure it's not always easy to get things. Once they're introduced, then they change again. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of back and forth. But knowing I think a lot of the folks, bipartisan, would be looking at this as a benefit for the Commonwealth.
Absolutely. We've received real favorable reaction to the concepts when we were shopping them on both sides of the aisle, House and Senate. What we've tried to do is build a prudent approach where there'll be multiple kind of check steps and a lot of independent analysis before the investments would be made, and really avoid some of the problems we've seen in other states where the initial proposals were probably too aggressive.
And I know you mentioned the dollar figure that Philadelphia would have available from the Volkswagen lawsuit, but is there going to be, I guess is there a certain person who decides how the rest of that money is being spent, and if that we will reach that percentage of money to be spent for EV charging and use?
Yeah, there is $118 million allocated to Pennsylvania. That every piece of information we have, the Pennsylvania DEP will be the entity that controls that. It's not been officially announced. After that, they have to submit a plan to the federal trustee, and the federal trustee will, hopefully approve the Pennsylvania plan. Then solicitations will go out for the dollars. We don't know if those are going to be allocated regionally. We don't know if they're going to be allocated programmatically. All of that is being held real tightly within the administration, and I think there's a lot of speculation about how that could go. What we do believe is, to the extent the region can come together and go to Harrisburg and say, this is an area of potential, that would be how we would hopefully get the most dollars for the city and our region. There is an opportunity to use up to 15% of those dollars for passenger vehicle charging, and that's where we're not sure that would be our first use of those dollars. We see things like the port and transit and supporting their electrification as the highest priority, but there is the opportunity to take successful pilots to scale, and I think it makes sense to reserve some of that money and potentially up to the 15% to support that both here and potentially in Pittsburgh and some of the other cities around the state.
Well, I say this, if we have something in the works and a plan in place, it may make it easier to apply with our surrounding region, because this is not just a Philadelphia issue. Obviously, it's going to be an issue for Philadelphia and the surrounding counties.
That's exactly correct.
And we have a better chance working with DVRPC as we work regionally, understanding that it's better to have that regional ask.
Yeah, one of the things that underlies the legislative idea is a state goal, but regionally based solutions.
Right. Now, in DVRPC, as we see this moving forward, and it sounds like somebody from your team would also be willing to work with us on this, and since you already have a ready-to-roll type place and documentation in place, I mean, it could be used as the baseline. But knowing what we have available to us, or potential available dollars to us, and then as we hear from some of our stakeholders, maybe some private dollars, whether it's third-party chargings or manufacturers. I know right now, and we'll get when Tesla's up here, but there's different ways to charge different vehicles. So as technology changes, I don't know if we'll have adapters to use different uses for charging stations, or is everybody going to have to be plugged into the future? Can you be 5 feet from a station to get charged, and all these other things that'll come into play? But do you see DVRPC as a willing participant in the task force to help guide this plan?
Absolutely, we'd be honored to participate in that and happy to share our expertise. And and as a member government, Philadelphia would simply have to ask us to direct some of our effort that way. If I may say two other things, we are working with the University of California in Davis, which has developed some very useful analysis tools that have been using with when we work with PICO. And we believe we're going to be getting some funding from the National Center for Sustainable Transportation to expand that research in southeastern Pennsylvania with new data from, we've already requested new vehicle registration data for southeastern Pennsylvania. So we'll be able to get we have already got all the cars in southeastern Pennsylvania from 2015. We can get that again for 2017 and get a sense of where the growth in electric vehicles is coming.
And I think it's important too, because as we move forward, again, we mentioned earlier, there's going to be a short-term goal of what we could do and a long-term goal. Obviously, we don't want to wait till we have everything perfect before we start doing anything, because as technology changes, it'll constantly change, and we just can't wait for that. But knowing what's coming on, and looking at the products that are coming online, and how affordable these new products will be, we see this. Even in the car show this year, coming and see the number of electric vehicles that we saw in the car show, you know that electric vehicles are going to be pretty well used in the city, and we need to make sure we have the availability to charging for them. So whatever we need to do to make this work, your input will be greatly appreciated.
Sure. Councilman, if I could add one thing. In the legislative proposal, one of the components of that is if we were to spend utility dollars on the infrastructure, those charging stations would have to be interoperable and would have to be public access, with the exception of if they were at a workplace or if they're in like a multi-dwelling unit apartment. But if it's something that's intended for the public, it has to be available to all, and it has to be on an interoperable platform.
Because a lot of the ideas that we saw, and we had some ideas too, of the parking lots that are empty at night, and all these other things that we could put there, looking at our building codes to add charging stations in areas that don't have them. When people go to work, if they could charge, and when they go home, they might not have to charge in front of their house, but they can charge in a lot somewhere. Or, these are things that we need as a city to do, to look at, to make sure we're providing what is necessary to make the use of EVs grow.
If I could just add one thought onto that, it would be, one idea that came to our heads when we were brainstorming about what you could do is, for instance, if you had lots and you would just let people plug in, the way you could have them pay for that is by having an additional permit that they may pay. I don't know what the amount would be, amount to cover the cost of the infrastructure, and then someone would have to go to the lot at night and make sure that everyone plugged in had that permit. Because a lot of the challenge for electric vehicles is actually, electricity is so inexpensive that the cost of collecting fees, additional fees for it, just the process of that can be almost as expensive as the electricity itself. Like having cellular connections or data connections for credit cards so on a day-to-day basis, that type of system won't work. You need a system where people can just plug in without having to make any transaction. And so I think one of the things we'll have to think about in the study is how to make that transaction cost as small as possible.
And I agree, and I think it's hard, when you're in a dense urban area, it's a little more difficult than if you're out in the rural area where everybody could just add that charger to their garage. So we have to be a little more creative on how we put these things together, and that's why hopefully with all these expertise that you guys have and people who have seen how other areas do it, people are trying different things. Some of them are successful, some of them aren't. So if we can learn from the ones that weren't successful and then learn from the ones that are and incorporate them together, hopefully Philadelphia could be an example of what you could do when you really put your heads together to make it work for everybody. Councilman O?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I just have a number of questions to go through. Some of it's just informational, for my purposes. But let me just start with this. In terms of city-owned property, be it parking lot at the airport, parking facilities, I understand, at least from our last conversation, that there may be some type of challenge in terms of expending funds to put in EV charging stations because without some type of legislation, the city is not able to recoup its costs.
Yeah, I think it's a shade different than that. The infrastructure can be a very large part of the cost of putting in the charger, especially when you're breaking concrete.
Yes.
What we have been looking for at PICO is the authorization to where we can move beyond the customer meter. Typically, if it's on the other side of the customer's meter, you would have to pay all that investment, and the cost, the ability to recover that investment would take a long time. For a lot of businesses, it would very unlikely be in their financial interest to host one of those charging stations. To the extent that we can put the infrastructure below ground in our utility rate base and then recover that over the very long period of time that utility investments are recovered under, we could allow the host to just pay for the charger. Alternatively, in some locations where there would be no host who is willing to be to be the owner, there would be the possibility of utility-owned charging stations. We have not made that decision whether that's a business that we want to be in or not. The Public Utility Commission hasn't made a decision whether that's a business they want us in or not. Our view now is to leave all options on the table while we do more analysis and get some more concrete plans in place, and then we'll know how to make this work. But right now, we don't know the answer.
So one of the challenges we're faced with is that the city has very much pushed to get this plan done within a year. And that seems to be a very large portion of the plan. In other words, we would have to know how we would be able, as a city, to put electric vehicle charging stations in the airport parking facilities, at the, even as you talked about, if there was some parking lots that allowed for charging in the evening, private employers who put charging stations, like how is all this going to get delivered? Do you have some idea of, at least on the part of PICO, I know you just said all options are open, but is there any time frame in which you would know about this legislation?
The legislation, we are making every effort, working with the sponsors to hope that gets enacted this year. If we have it enacted this year, we have a clear path forward. If not, what it probably requires us to do is go up to our Public Utility Commission and kind of see where the boundaries would be. Having the city making a compelling statement that, at least on a pilot basis, some of this investment should be undertaken would certainly be beneficial. We can't give any guarantees. We do think in the interim, the Volkswagen dollars allow some pilots to be put in place, and is really an almost perfect use of that funding that's coming to the city. And then the overall Volkswagen settlement should also give you a jump start, and that's not controlled by Volkswagen, that's controlled by the state. And we are ready, willing, and able to work with all parties to help pull the region together to communicate that to Harrisburg, that this is one of the good uses of those dollars. I don't know if you have anything to add, Rob.
Yeah, just I think a couple things important. Whatever plan the city comes up with in the next year, a very, very important part of it is to have a deployment at a rate that allows you to respond to how that equipment is actually being used. Because as the EV project found out, they ended up installing a lot of equipment that ended up not being used very much. And some of the work that we're trying to do with UC Davis is to try to learn how to figure out what locations will see the greatest use. And it's very important to keep the feedback in that process and have it as a continuous learning process, and not say, this is how we're going to deploy it for the next 10 years, and keep it very flexible and open and responsive. And also make sure it's a plan that will be good or be viable in the long term when you have 10% of the vehicles or 20% of the vehicles electric, because that's a lot of vehicles. And a process that works for the 51 vehicles that, or whatever it was that had the curbside spots, we found out that at that point, very early point in that wasn't viable anymore. And having reserved spots for everyone in the city will probably not be politically viable, I would imagine. But politics is your game, so.
Right. No, thank you.
So, and I would add to what Rob said, even if 1 year from now, PICO doesn't have the clear statutory authority to do the investment, we'll certainly be able to do the investment up to the meter. We certainly can help in selecting the most cost-effective locations to connect your pilot or neighborhood charging stations. And if we have the right signals, we can make decisions. The process that's laid out in the legislation takes about 18 months to fully unfold, but you can start planning the day the legislation passed. And in fact, we're already planning and looking at options now. So these things can move in parallel, and one doesn't have to be entirely complete, restricting the ability to move forward on the other.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we have in creating this plan is we're going to have to try to guess the speed of the technology curve. So we are not building infrastructure that's outdated, both in terms of the physical resources and the culture of how charging is being done. I think, kind of as this moratorium took place, there were 58 charging units in front of a house, and typically the testimony we received were from hybrid owners who would drive 7 or 8 miles and come back and recharge, drive and recharge, drive and recharge. I've got to think that is an outdated type of technology as we look at how we're going to build a city infrastructure. I doubt we would be building an infrastructure for vehicles that constantly need to be recharged every 8 or 9 miles, or 14 or 20 miles. What is your plan? Do you have a basis of trying to, or do you have some type of foresight into the technology curve? I know we have private industry here probably chomping at the bit to tell us, but do you, on behalf of government or on behalf of car share, do you have some idea of the speed of that technology curve?
Whatever the technology is, the biggest challenge, and Tom may feel free to correct me on this, but the biggest challenge and expense is getting the electricity to the place where you're going to install that actual charging technology. The actual charging technology itself, if it changes, you can swap out that $1,500 charging device and replace it with whatever the most current one is, whatever that is, if that's some sort of a giant capacitor that is charging over time to put electricity quickly into a vehicle, or whether it's, but having the conduit and the wiring in place is really the greatest expense. And I think the biggest challenge for expanding electric vehicles right now is the cost of the vehicles and the low cost of gasoline. There's only a very narrow range of driving that makes economic sense for someone as an individual to choose to have an electric vehicle, which is why they're requiring subsidies and provide. So in order for them to become mainstream, we either need to charge more for gasoline or figure out a way to keep the vehicle prices low, which is a challenge when you get to more than 0.1% of the vehicles on the road. It becomes a very different challenge than introducing a new product.
I do have a question for car share. Are there successful EV car share programs operating in the U.S. or around the world? Well, I'll take out around the world. I know that there are, but in the U.S., do we have any successful EV car share programs?
Enterprise does not.
Enterprise does not. So we have looked,
I apologize for interrupting, but we have had success with them in our rental fleet. And if a lot of our business with Enterprise is a local insurance replacement, so if somebody has a higher policy that allows for a higher amount, they're willing to get behind that and try it out. So it's an opportunity that I know Enterprise is open to help people get behind an EV, to support that initiative for people maybe to make their next purchase, an electric vehicle.
so electric vehicle rental is successful, but the car share, based on your testimony, that at the time that you did it, the vehicles cost more, and then unfortunately, drivers didn't seem to want to recharge for the next person. Okay.
Right. So with the rental, we're seeing that vehicle every time it goes out and every time it comes back. They're meeting with somebody face to face. With car share, we don't see our vehicles or members after every trip.
Okay, and then just in terms of just information, you did talk about, or the testimony included the benefits of EV vehicles versus fuel-powered vehicles, but just in terms of question, what is the longevity of an EV versus a traditional fuel-based vehicle?
And speaking of what we know, we haven't really gotten to a large number of vehicles that are reaching the end of the life of their battery. The battery is the kind of definer of the useful life of the vehicle. Someone told me one time a conventional engine has several hundred moving parts. A all-electric vehicle has about 8 moving parts in its engine. That's why it is cheaper to maintain and in many ways more reliable, which as you think of the economics, it's still easy to think of them as, kind of high-end vehicles, but as the prices keep coming down, they do have a great opportunity for people on the lower end of the economic spectrum, because you're not getting hit with rebuilding a transmission and that $2,000 expense. In the next couple of years, we'll get a better idea of how long those batteries in the cars are actually lasting. So that's remained to be seen, but we're seeing the batteries are getting better and better, and the vehicles are getting better and better. It's one of the reasons when Rob was talking about you need to plan in kind of time periods. We didn't do a whole lot on promotion in the last 4 years. It was only when we saw more vehicles meeting more market niches and getting affordable to more customers that we felt it really merited our time to get more active in this to meet emerging customer needs. In the legislation, what they do is they require refreshes of these regional plans every 4 years. There's no specific art to that. I don't know if 4 years is right or 5 years is right, but I think it's something you have to look at periodically because of the technology development, both on the vehicle side and the charging station side.
If I may just add a couple thoughts to that. One thing that vehicle manufacturers work very hard at is the controls to make their batteries last as long as possible. And as a result, I think they're lasting longer and longer, much longer than they initially thought. They retain most of their charge to the point where there are now, for the first time in the last few years, been used cars on the electric vehicle market, and some very inexpensive cars have come off of lease. And it'll be interesting to see how that phenomena unfolds, because as that happens, then they no longer become just the vehicles for the very wealthy, which they have been up till now, or the very committed up till now, but can become, as they come off lease, a lot of these vehicles are very inexpensive. And replacing the batteries is currently, exceptionally expensive and may not be worth it, but as Tom noted, it's expected by everyone, and I think the experience is starting to show that the maintenance costs are very low, which is perversely one of the challenges for getting car dealers to sell them, because car dealers make a lot of money off of their return visits for maintenance. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a couple general questions you may or may not be able to answer, but would you say the number of cars in Philadelphia has, in the last 5 years, has increased, decreased, stayed the same?
That's Rob.
Yes. No, sorry. I could find that answer for you. I could find that answer. We have that data.
Okay.
I don't have it offhand.
Okay, and I have a question for the rental car business. Enterprise is the business you're running?
Yes, the car share division.
Oh, okay. Well, you may not know this, but has the rental car business increased, decreased, stayed the same last 5 years in the city overall?
Well, I could say our market share has increased. I don't know overall.
You don't know the total?
Exactly.
I'll tell you why I'm asking these questions, because I can see what's going on with, it's funny yesterday, with Uber and Lyft. By the way, I pulled at the stoplight at 17th and Walnut, okay? Woman knocks on my window and says, "Uber driver?" I said, "No, it's I mean, there's so many going on that
Right.
I wonder what that's doing to the demand of rental vehicles, owning cars, et cetera. I just wanted to get a fuller picture of how that's impacting this section.
I can certainly speak to that. Uber, Lyft has definitely taken a piece of the car share business, for sure. Not so much rental. Rental's a different animal when you need a vehicle to get around and for a full day, where car share, if you just need a vehicle for an hour or two, you very easily could get into an Uber.
Right.
Now, what I can say is Enterprise is partnered with Uber, actually, and have, hundreds of vehicles in other markets where we actually will rent vehicles to Uber drivers through an Uber program. So that's kind of unique.
That's a creative
that
idea.
You think,
Yeah.
right? It's like an oxymoron, but they need to get the vehicles, they need to get, these drivers are looking for work, but they don't have the type of vehicles that Uber or Lyft would require them to drive. So we've been partnering with them that way.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for this panel? And knowing that, again, this is just the beginning, so we have a few more panelists to come up, and then some written testimony that was added. But thank you so much for your testimony. Looking forward to working with you as this moves forward, and hopefully have a plan in place for this time next year. Thank you very much. Matt, would you like to read the next panel, please?
Kevin George Miller and Bo Whiteman.
Kevin, if you'd like to start.
Sure. Happy to. Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to testify. Pardon my computer up here. I cut out 2/3 of my remarks in the interest of time to keep things moving, so I did some editing on the fly to keep this short and sweet, but happy to answer any further questions, and the remainder of my remarks are submitted as written
Yes, and we
testimony.
do have your whole testimony submitted for the record also. Thank you.
So my name is Kevin Miller. I am the Director of Public Policy for ChargePoint. ChargePoint designs and sells electric vehicle charging stations and provides network services for those stations. I serve with Tom from PICO and Rob from the DVRPC as co-chair of the EV Infrastructure Committee for the PEA EV Coalition, and I also served as the co-chair for the Infrastructure Committee for the Massachusetts Zero Emission Vehicle Task Force, which produced strategic recommendations for EV infrastructure in Massachusetts. My testimony in January, when we first touched on this issue, focused on the whole palette of policy options that could be pursued to support transportation and electrification. And today my remarks will focus largely on EV-ready building codes and why those are such a critical and invaluable tool for decreasing the barrier for site hosts of EV charging stations to enter into the market. Briefly, ChargePoint is the world's largest electric vehicle charging network in the world, with charging solutions for every charging need and all the places EV drivers go, at home, work, around town, and on the road. We've got more than 34,000 independently owned and operated charging spots and more than 7,000 customers. Our drivers on our network have completed more than 23 million charging sessions, saving upwards of 21 million gallons of gasoline and driving more than 525 million gas-free miles. Our site hosts make decisions about whether to set fees or prices for EV charging, and over 60% of the charging on our network is free. As I mentioned, we don't typically own or operate the infrastructure. We sell those products and the network services to families, businesses, city and state agencies to provide those services directly to drivers. This resolution presents a fantastic opportunity for Philadelphia to really take the lead on increasing access to clean transportation by lowering the barriers for EV charging site hosts to enter into the market to provide access to the refueling for electric vehicles. ChargePoint strongly supports any effort to increase access to charging, and we recommend that decisions to shape EV charging strategy in Philly be made in the context of a smart network of home, multi-unit dwelling, workplace, and public-facing EV charging services. With an increasing variety of funding opportunities on the horizon, it's critical for the city and for Pennsylvania as a whole to ensure that there is a level playing field for the wide range of competitive market actors to support that increased access to clean transportation. The private market is truly the driver of innovative EV charging products and services, and it's essential that investments that are made with public funds support and actually don't crowd out or push out those private dollars. We want to make sure that we increase the value of the pie and that we don't replace those private funds with public ones. Requiring private investments is a critical tool for ensuring that you site charging stations efficiently, and again, that you increase the total value of investments. Setting rules for the road on infrastructure investments through crafting a city-wide EV strategy, which seems to be one of the key goals of today's session and is generally on the table, would help to send a clear signal to the market that Philadelphia supports new, innovative EV and EV charging solutions. With regard to EV-ready building codes, sustainable policies to support EV charging and understanding why EV-ready building codes are critical in the first place requires an understanding of how EV drivers charge their vehicles. As previous panelists have stated, most charging takes place at home or at work. EV drivers are refueling their vehicles when they arrive at their destinations, not on their way to them. And so because EVs will largely be refueled in buildings and parking lots, it's essential that we prepare those sites to accommodate EVs. Failing to prepare our buildings now and when they're being constructed will cost millions later on, because retrofitting a building that is not EV ready is significantly more expensive than getting it right the first time. Building codes are sets of rules and regulations that govern baseline standards for how residential and commercial buildings are constructed. The details of an EV-ready building code can vary by region, but the typical baseline is that they would require new building construction to prepare a certain proportion of parking spots for EV charging to be installed at a later date. Again, not making the decisions of what type of solution is best, but decreasing that barrier for future EV charging site hosts to make that decision and to pull in those private dollars. While EV-ready building codes can help encourage EV adoption, they don't necessarily require mandating EV charging stations to be included at the time of construction. When buildings aren't built EV-ready, owners will need to engage in expensive and time-consuming retrofitting, adding new electrical capacity and running conduit in order to install EV charging. This can take weeks of additional construction time and cost tens of thousands of dollars per installation, delaying charging availability, taking time away from other lucrative projects, and compromising people's ability to drive electric when they want to. We ran, and I included in our written testimony, a case study on what the potential value add of having EV-ready building codes in Massachusetts was based on some data that we pulled on current construction outlook. And the site installation cost difference for a retrofit scenario versus an EV-ready building cost would be in a retrofit, you'd have $3,700 to $7,000 in costs for installation compared to, for an EV-ready building, about $1,600. We projected a savings of $67 million in retrofitting costs by just having a certain percentage, 5% of parking spots be EV-ready. There's plenty of states and cities that have taken these steps and put those steps into practice. There's a number of different examples that could be discussed by the task force. As I mentioned at the hearing in January, there's a range of other barriers to increasing access to EV charging in Philadelphia, which I included in written testimony. I'd urge the council to consider adopting those EV-ready building codes, convening a public-private task force to set citywide strategy, and pilot a range of solutions like urban workplace charging programs, smart curbside pilots that ensure equitable access to not only the charging spots, but to the parking availability, and efforts to provide equitable access to electrified transportation for folks who don't actually own their own vehicles, such as public transit pilots, car sharing, and ride hailing. And there are examples of similar pilots in other parts of the country that are working and are providing good lessons. We've got experience in implementing those pilots, such as a Charge to Work New York program, which is currently underway, that seeks to connect folks that don't have dedicated workplace charging with charging services at nearby parking facilities. So I'd be happy to dive in after Bo and address any questions, but it's just the tip of the iceberg, and we really appreciate the opportunity to shine a light on this critical issue to increase access to clean transportation, and we're looking forward to being a partner for the city, for the council, for the mayor's office, and with all the stakeholders here to ensure that the goals that you're setting forth here can be achieved.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll ask a couple questions after we're done full testimony. Just state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Certainly. Good afternoon. My name is Bill Whiteman. I'm a senior associate on Tesla's business development and government affairs team, focusing on the acceleration of EV infrastructure around the country. Tesla would like to thank the council and members here on the committee today for the opportunity to present testimony on the future of EV charging here in Philadelphia. As a quick background, Tesla is an American manufacturer of the world's most advanced electric vehicles and battery energy storage systems. While most known for our best-in-class vehicles, we have also been investing in a global infrastructure network of EV supercharger stations, known as superchargers, to make electric road trips easier than ever before. Later this year, Tesla will introduce its newest vehicle, the Model 3, with a starting price of $35,000 and at least 200 miles of range on a single charge. As a bit of background, the Philadelphia EV parking program that was recently placed on moratorium, in Tesla's opinion, was not designed for long-term sustainability. Since the code allowed for no more than 2 EV parking permits on the largest of city blocks, the number of total participants over time was limited from the start. In addition, the upfront costs associated with installation created an impossible hurdle for many would-be EV drivers. While the program was and remains useful to a number of residents, it did not allow for the growing infrastructure needs of the city. So where do we go from here? There are a number of actions the council can take to create a holistic plan for the robust deployment of EVs in Philadelphia. At a high level, planning efforts should include the Department of Motor Vehicles, city building officials, and the local utility to properly account for where EVs currently are and how to accommodate their use in the future. Specific steps include tracking EV ownership in the city, developing a streamlined permitting process for EV charging hardware installation, updating building codes to promote EV readiness, and working with PECO to efficiently promote increased EV adoption. By understanding where EVs currently are located within the city can better understand where to direct and make infrastructure investments. It will also help inform future planning decisions and could assist with the creation of charging depots. As city planning officials develop a better sense for where EVs are, they should work with building officials to make sure infrastructure deployment is as easy as possible. Developing a streamlined permitting process for EV chargers would be a good first step. Most EV charging takes place on a level 2 system, which operates at 240 volts and is ideal for home or workplace charging. Most installations can be completed by any licensed electrician in an afternoon. Looking ahead, the council could consider updating its building codes for new developments and redevelopments to prepare for EV charging station installation. Very recently, San Francisco moved to require all new parking, both residential and commercial, to be equipped with the necessary conduit for future EV charging needs. Working in conjunction with PECO could also help with promoting EV adoption and ensure charging infrastructure is deployed most efficiently. Across the country, utilities are beginning to identify the benefits that EVs and associated hardware deployment can have on the distribution system. City officials can engage with PECO and other stakeholders to develop a program that is in the interest of the grid and ratepayers alike. Finally, Philadelphia should not give up entirely on its ambitious curbside charging program. By pursuing a pilot in this space that alters ownership of the hardware, greater opportunities can be unlocked. Take, for example, the City of Amsterdam. Their city-managed program invites residents to apply for a charging solution in their neighborhood, and infrastructure is installed as the fleet grows. The city's parking authority manages deployment and location, while contracted third parties own, operate, maintain the charging hardware. Ultimately, the city will find willing partners among Tesla, certainly the other OEMs, Pico, and other charging station operators. Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to your questions.
Thank you both for your testimony and appreciate your willingness to help. As the charging stations are rolled out, as we come up with infrastructure, I know Tesla has their own charging feature. Are you able to charge at other than Tesla charging stations?
Tesla vehicles can charge on any charging system. Unfortunately, Tesla charging hardware can only be utilized by Tesla drivers at this time.
Would your company look at other ways to do that? I know it's a tough question for you.
That is a tough question, one that I get everywhere I go. Standardization is a difficult conversation among the OEMs. What we're choosing to focus on is where we can all work together, which is on the level 2 charging solutions, where while we manufacture and distribute proprietary connectors, a Tesla driver can utilize any level 2 charging solution, and those public facilities can benefit all EV drivers. And so what we're really interested in seeing is the proliferation of those level 2 charging solutions, and it honestly does not matter to us what connector is on the end, although in truth Tesla is also going to be interested in, and what you're going to see from us in the coming months, is a pretty rapid deployment of our level 2 charging solutions, and we're just going to be giving them away to anyone who will take them and install them for our drivers.
Give them away and install them.
Exactly.
That's great. Well, that's a good sign. And do you have somebody, from the manufacturer standpoint, that would be willing to join our task force to move forward? All right, then maybe we could, if you could give that information to the chair, I think it would be great to have as many people who understand the need for this, and then also, obviously, there's a little bit of personal benefit for Tesla in this, but we want to see all ideas being used and at least contemplated as we move forward. As far as third-party charging stations, and sometimes we hear that the infrastructure necessary to do that, it does not make it profitable to install stations. Do you see, working with Pico, if we have some infrastructure in place, or using our building code to determine the infrastructure necessary, do you see that as helping third-party charging stations get involved in this process?
I think we're already seeing third-party charging stations find a variety of different reasons to get involved. And one of the unique things about having a decentralized business model like ChargePoint does is that we're not forcing ourselves to try and make a buck off of the sale of the electron. One of the things that we've seen is that by showing site hosts that they have ways to augment their existing operations or services with EV charging as a new amenity, they're no longer trying to completely recoup the investment with each charge delivered. So you're able to allow a retail store, and we've run numbers on this, they've verifiably shown that by offering EV charging, you're going to increase dwell time and bring in new customers. 2 out of 3 folks who will come to a retail location and plug in will stay at that location for over 2 hours. And that's based on the data on the 24 million charging sessions that have taken place on our network. So we're able to make cases and help new site hosts understand that they can, again, augment their existing business model to find a way to change the scope of what profitability means. How do we increase the value of this investment to a range of different site hosts? So by doing that, we're able to bring in a range of different partners who wouldn't otherwise immediately think that EV charging would be the right approach for them. And in most cases, there are strong opportunities for any kind of site host.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any other, Councilman Dom?
That's not a direct question. It's going to be an ask, okay? Mr. Chairman, yeah, put him on the spot if you don't mind. This is for Tesla. I feel I can ask this question. Elon Musk went to the University of Pennsylvania. He graduated from the Wharton School, I believe, right?
I believe, yes.
Okay, so we educated him, the chairman of Tesla. We've had 100,000 millennials move to Philadelphia in the last 10 years, and in the last year, we've had the highest percentage growth of millennials of any major city in the country. Based on that background, I want you to find out if we can set up a meeting with Tesla to consider opening a plant or manufacturing facility in Philadelphia. We are the perfect city. I know you're coming out with a new Tesla that's $35,000. We're the perfect city to do that kind of a manufacturing. We have a great workforce. We have inexpensive housing. So would you let us, the chairman of the committee, know who that person is that we can talk to about that?
I'll take it home and come back with something for you.
Okay, thank you. I want to get your card, though, before you leave.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman Dom. Councilman O?
Thank you very much. I'd make a joke, but we're being recorded. In terms of some of the ideas that were kind of thrown out, one of the ideas was that in crowded areas like Center City, where we have 2-hour, 4-hour parking areas, that some of those areas might be level 2 charging sites for EVs, and we could kind of strategically place some of those. The issue is always money. And so, as we have talked to some various companies, they, as you have said, are willing to do public-private partnerships, provide a level of support for the city to install these types of resources. Does that idea resonate with you? Does you think that works? And what kind of resources? I know you just said you'd be willing to give the city, for example, as many Tesla charging stations as we may want to install. What exactly is that? Where are we in terms of public-private partnerships?
You want to take the first?
Sure, yeah, I'll take a first stab, not at his offer to deliver free stations. I'll let him take that one on. But I think that there's a lot of really viable and interesting opportunities to create sustainable public-private partnerships, not necessarily in saying give the city free services, but to what extent can the city serve as a convening authority to bring together the right sorts of folks to address some of these critical problems. One of the programs that we're involved with in New York City that I mentioned briefly is a program that seeks to address the challenge of providing access to workplace charging in a dense urban environment where parking is at a premium and often not necessarily available. So by bringing together workplaces, parking operators, folks like ChargePoint, New York City was able to identify coalitions that could come together to chip away at different parts of the problem. I don't think there's ever going to be a one-size-fits-all approach, but if you bring folks together in that sense to provide those types of innovative approaches to increasing access to charging, that's where some of the real value can be found.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Every city is different, and that's one of the challenges that we as an industry face in increasing access to EV infrastructure. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution, and most importantly is having a willing partner in every city we go to not only have an interest in this, but to seek to pursue a final solution. So, number one, engaging with the parking authority everywhere we go is step number one, and finding out where we can work together, who is willing to be making, or who is going to be willing to make an investment. I can't promise you anything sitting at this table today, but we are, as a company, exploring every opportunity that is put in front of us right now to crack this nut, so to speak.
And one other, just to underscore the fact that, again, one city's solution isn't the same that's going to work for another. So having an open, continuing dialogue between public and private stakeholders is extremely valuable. One of the things that we're starting to do in some other cities is identify If you're already looking to electrify fleet services, I believe Councilman Dom mentioned, leading by example opportunities. If the fleet is already going to be electrified and there are investments that are going to be made, how do you start to bring in folks, again, like the charging equipment and services folks, other private fleets that could potentially have access to that infrastructure at varying hours of the day, which you can achieve with smart, connected, networked infrastructure. So how do you spread those costs out from the public sector to include private sector fleets by having a shared operation and ownership of the infrastructure? Again, so there isn't that one Band-Aid approach, but having a forum, a task force, some kind of commission citywide to entertain those opportunities and to continually create new pilot programs by bringing together standing city agencies, the private industry, the utility, and a number of other stakeholders at a regional level who all have expertise, some of whom you've convened today, is just a wonderful workshop that can be ongoing to provide some of these new innovative solutions, and that we can get some of these going within that 12-month time frame to start getting real data and evaluate what's working for Philly.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I also like to recognize Councilman Taubenberger, who's here at the hearing. Councilman Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've spent most of this hearing talking primarily about electric car vehicles, but I'm curious about other type of electric transportation, bikes or other type of vehicles. I know there's a company that I had a chance to meet with about 2 weeks ago that was focusing on bicycles, but I'm curious from electric vehicles from that perspective, from a charging dynamic. I know in Mount Airy there are electric bikes that people are familiar with, and I'm considering the nature of the city, although cars is something that we often use, but there are other types of transportation concepts, and there was actually an article in this week's Inquirer in Sunday edition talking about how City of Philadelphia is so much of a bike culture, and I'm curious from that perspective, from a charging dynamic for other type of electric vehicles that could be using charging technology from either ChargePoint or Tesla.
I couldn't, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, sure.
I couldn't agree more with you, Councilman. EV charging is just one part of the solution of smart mobility and of a smart city's infrastructure. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to EV charging or to ensuring access to clean transportation, be it powered by your shoes or powered by bikes or powered by public transit. We've had the opportunity to partner with Pittsburgh, a number of other cities that participated in the Smart City Challenge last year to identify what is the full range of opportunities and policies that can be put into place. EV charging is one of them, but ensuring that you're increasing access to clean mobility solutions and that's caked into planning in general, be it electric buses, as SEPTA is doing, or increasing e-bike opportunities. These are all key features of a program, and I think there are opportunities to electrify a lot of the way that people move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as we look at the prospect of adding, for starters, electric vehicle charging infrastructure to possibly city right-of-ways, one thing that is kind of I at least find interesting about charging electric vehicles is up until the plug itself, the electricity is agnostic. It doesn't care where it's going. And so if we're looking at adding charging to a particular block for vehicles, and hey, you've got a rack of I don't know what we call them in Philadelphia, city bikes or bike shares, and we want to electrify that fleet as well, bringing in the power is the hard part, and oftentimes not hugely long-term, but it takes time to plan. And once you've brought it in, it's not it's not particularly difficult to kind of pull it off onto other things as well. So, to my colleague's point, including it in a comprehensive plan is a great place to start. And Tesla, while we don't have those types of product offerings, we're certainly not going to stand in the way.
But if another company had those type of product offerings that they decided to bring to market, would the charging opportunity that we're discussing be available to them?
Well, it's hard to say because, for instance, if we're talking about a fleet of electric bicycles, you might want the chargers to be on kind of the mounts where they go back in, which aren't going to be accessible for someone who's parking a car halfway down the block, or even, for an electric city bus somewhere along the way. I think importantly, What we can do is, with every new product that becomes available, in the electric mobility space, we take a look at where there are synergies between them, where can we install charging to benefit as many people as possible.
Yeah, because there are newer companies that are looking at dockless charging locations for especially on bikes, as opposed to traditional, like we have Indigo, which is a docking station, but there are newer companies that are looking at bike share concepts without a docking station, so they would be flexible. So they had a fleet of electric vehicles or electric bikes that would just need a location to charge.
Yeah, and again, having that underlying infrastructure and having that common discussion all at the same time ensures that, as Bo pointed to before, if you're going to dig, let's try to just dig once. Let's not unduly increase the costs associated with installing new innovative mobility solutions, and ensure that as we start to deploy and incentivize increased access to infrastructure, that it be smart, connected, and networked. Having a dockless bike share system hinges on knowing where the bike is, and a lot of that has to do with, is it part of the Internet of Things? Are we connected? What's the value in being able to manage remotely and monitor the operations and the maintenance of the infrastructure that we're deploying, and how do we make sure that we're getting the value of the data and being able to incentivize the highest utilization, perhaps by setting price signals to incentivize folks to come in and then leave once they're done charging. So again, having these smart connected resources will, by definition, create more opportunities to deliver value to the citizens of Philadelphia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony, and looking forward to working with you as this process moves forward. Before we introduce the next panel, I just wanted to go over some people that we had mentioned, and I'm sure this is not going to be the end, but as a possible task force, we were looking at Otis, Office of Transportation Infrastructure Systems, Fleet, L&I, Sustainability, the Parking Authority, PICO, DVRPC, EV users, manufacturers, Teslas, et cetera, third-party chargers like ChargePoint, and parking operators. And we would be willing to open this up to other people who we think would be very important to this process. Again, knowing that coming up with a plan is not going to be easy, but knowing that we had the proper stakeholders involved is the most important part, I think, to move forward. So what I would ask you to do, if anybody who did testify are here, before we can move on, is just when you feel free to forward other ideas of people who you think should be involved in the task force to us, so that when we work with the administration to put this together, we could have everybody necessary in order to start the process. Also, I want to, for the record, there was some written testimony submitted by Genevieve Cullen, President Electric Drive Transportation Association, Dode Bardock, Project Manager, Public Charging Infrastructure, City of Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and Susan Anderson, Director of City of Portland, Oregon Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So we also have that testimony. And Matt, would you like to read the next person testifying?
Kathy Corby.
Oh. Hi.
How do you do? Thank you for this opportunity to speak to the council. I'm here to represent informally and in a self-appointed fashion two important constituencies which I have heard at least one of those constituencies mentioned. I am an EV owner and I am also a retired family physician. I moved to Philadelphia as my forever city 2 years ago. I had a large number of...
Just state your name again for the record.
Yes, Kathy Corby, Kathycorby, MD.
Go ahead. Thank you.
So I had a number of reasons for relocating, many of them personal, but some of them were that I had heard that Philadelphia was known to be a green city with a very advanced and forward-looking perspective. My personal reason, or one of my personal reasons for moving here, although I had a number of choices, involved the fact that I was able to negotiate with Toll Brothers, the company that sold me my Center City condominium, availability of EV charging for my beloved Chevrolet Volt, which I bought 5 years ago, and with which I would never part. Well, I would part with it to buy a Model 3 Tesla. However, I don't think that's going to happen. So I came from California. I expected to find Philadelphia to be very advanced in its EV charging policies, and instead, I unfortunately found it to be somewhat of a laggard. The city that I moved from provided free or at least subsidized EV charging at all public venues. Solar roofs were placed on parking facilities, as well as refitting public parking lots with solar panels or roofing, enabling local generation of power to reduce grid reliance, and multifamily units routinely made charging options available to renters and purchasers. So I found that none of these, or very, very few of these, appeared to exist in Philadelphia, and this, in fact, I was surprised about. So I would like personally to see a change in a number of the policies that I believe we've actually heard today discussed. I'd like to see them enabled for my own personal reasons and on behalf of other EV users. However, I'm also here to speak of another issue of great importance to Philadelphia residents. You heard me mention that I am a retired physician. I'm a graduate of Stanford University and practiced family and emergency medicine for 40 years. Certainly it can come as a surprise to no one that there are grave consequences to urban air pollution, and that internal combustion engines contribute greatly to urban air pollution, and certainly contribute to our own air pollution here in Philadelphia. This is important. These issues are important to asthma and COPD sufferers in the short run, but poor air quality also contributes to decreased cardiovascular health and cancer risk, both lung cancer and other kinds of cancer as well. There is adequate evidence that the effects are both long and short-term, and that the cardiovascular adverse effects actually begin in youth. It may be that pregnancy outcomes are affected as well by air quality in our urban environment. The latest published estimate that I was able to find from the World Health Organization reported that in 2012, approximately 3.7 million people worldwide died from outdoor urban and rural sources of air pollution. The cause of deaths was broken down as follows: ischemic heart disease, 40%, stroke, 40%, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, 11%, lung cancer, 6%, and acute lower respiratory infections in children, 3%. I have heard panelists, even here, refer dismissively to the benefits of electric vehicles as providing only reduced tailpipe emissions, but I would like to submit that this may be one of the most important considerations to Philadelphia residents in the long run, and to submit that those of you who represent Philadelphia residents must take this into consideration as you undergo your deliberations. Does anyone here think that the internal combustion engine will be the transportation of the future? I certainly don't, and I defy anyone here who does. We need to begin preparations now with vigorous support of EV policies to shape the city of the future, our Philadelphia of the future. I realize that center city locations and residential areas with limited parking present special challenges, but I am confident that the ways can be found and constituents convinced that the City Council is acting in the interest of all of its citizens by supporting progressive policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Very good. And appreciate your testimony, and knowing that that is also very important to us on council, and I think to a lot of the clean air folks that we've dealt with during this process. Is there anyone else, any other questions here?
I do have one. If the doctor would come back just for a quick second.
Doctor, we'll just call it real quick.
I'm sorry if I didn't catch this, if you did say, where were you from originally? I mean,
I was born in the Midwest. I was educated, I received my medical degree from Stanford
I heard that.
in 1981 and practiced in California for most of my career. Actually, for all
and
of
so
my career.
you felt that they were much more advanced than we are in electric cars.
I am afraid that I need to say that, yes.
And what is the one thing, if you could like wave a magic wand that you could wish we would do, what would that be?
I think I'd like to support the efforts of a number of people that have spoken to making charging facilities at least EV ready and available so that more purchasers would be enabled to buy electric vehicles. We are seeing the prices come down. We're actually in a sort of a magical period, I believe, because federal subsidies still exist and federal tax credits and even rebates are still available. But because a number of equipment manufacturers are becoming more aware of the benefits, a number of potential purchasers have a much wider choice, and the vehicles have actually entered a price range where normal middle-class people can afford to purchase them. So I think that the city ideally will support those options and support those choices. People aren't going to stop buying private vehicles, at least in the near future, but I'd like to see the city encourage people to purchase private vehicles that would be run on electricity. That and, of course, solar power generation as well, which I see as inseparable.
Understood. Dr. Corby, thank you very much, and Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again for your testimony. Is there anyone else here to testify? Seeing, are you here? Come on up.
I hadn't planned to, but there were two questions, so I'll...
All right, before you start, just state your name for the record, and then we can...
Sure. I hadn't planned to, but here I am. My name's Meenal Raval. I've spoken here today. I want to say that EVs are not just for the wealthy. I own a smart electric car that's a little two-seater, perfect for city parking. It takes me 70 miles on a charge, which is pretty much all over the city, do all my errands. And I leased it for $150 a month. My fuel costs have gone from going to the gas station to my electric bill, which has halved. It used to be $800 a year for my Honda Fit. It's now about $400 a year on my electric bill. So it is not just for the affluent. I'm just wanted to lay that out there. The other is, there was a question about e-bike charging. I own the electric bike shop in Mount Airy that was referenced, thank you. And e-bikes charge on a regular 110 outlet. So pretty much the charging infrastructure is already there. Wherever, coffee shops, wherever there's an outlet available.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for adding that to the hearing. Is there anybody else here to testify? Seeing none before we close, I would just like, Matt, just if you want to read real quickly the written testimony for the record, and then we will close the hearing. Thank you.
This is the testimony of Genevieve Cullen, President of the Electric Drive Transportation Association, to the Joint Committee on Streets and Services and Global Opportunities and the Creative Innovative Economy regarding Resolution 161039. The Electric Drive Transportation Association, EDTA, is the cross-industry trade association promoting the advancement of electric drive technology and electrified transportation. Our members represent the entire value chain of electric drive, including vehicle manufacturers, battery and component manufacturers, utilities and energy companies, and smart grid and charging infrastructure developers. Collectively, we are committed to realizing the economic, national security, and environmental benefits of replacing oil with hybrid, plug-in hybrid, battery, and fuel cell electric vehicles. Oil provides 93% of the energy used for transportation in the United States. Around 1/3 of the oil we use is imported, costing our economy roughly $192 billion annually. Even with reduced imports, our energy and economic security continue to be threatened by oil dependence. Our transportation sector is fueled almost wholly by a single commodity whose price is set by the global market and whose availability is subject to significant geopolitical uncertainty. On a microeconomic level, by using electricity as an alternative fuel source, Philadelphia families can benefit from significant savings and be insulated from volatile petroleum fuel prices that rise and fall with the world oil market. Even when the price at the pump is relatively low, electricity costs are lower and more stable. On average, driving on electricity costs the equivalent of $1 per gallon of gasoline. Electric transportation also provides public health and environment benefits by reducing improving air quality and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The Union of Concerned Scientists studied the total emissions reductions of electric drive in every region of the country. They concluded that no matter where in the U.S. an EV is charged and operated, electric drive vehicles have fewer total well-to-wheel emissions than the average gasoline-powered vehicle sold today. Purchase incentives, increased availability of workplace charging, HOV lane access, and preferential parking are examples of effective policies that are speeding the adoption of electric transportation in cities and states across the country. We would recommend that the City Council's Joint Committee continue Philadelphia's leadership in electrification and accelerate the achievement of its economic and environmental benefits for Philadelphia's residents, businesses, and visitors. We thank you for the opportunity to submit our testimony and look forward to working with you to expand electric transportation in Philadelphia. And this is a memo addressed to Chairman David Oak, Chairman Mark Squilla, members of the Joint Committee. From Susan Anderson, Director of the City of Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony outlining Portland's electric vehicle strategy. Portland has had success with implementing some of our EV work already and offer these suggestions as Philadelphia moves forward with its EV strategy. Portland's Climate Action Plan includes goals to reduce local carbon emissions 40% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. Transportation is responsible for 40% of Portland's carbon emissions. Shifting fuel sources from gasoline and diesel to electricity is a key strategy to achieving Portland's goals. City of Portland staff are working to encourage people movement instead of car movement by creating a healthy, connected city that prioritizes safe and convenient walking, biking, and transit over automobile use. Portland's electric vehicle strategy focuses on electrification of the public transit system, shared vehicles, and the private automobiles that remain in use. Encouraging the use of electric vehicles is one of many strategies the city is taking to reduce carbon emissions from the transportation sector. Portland's strategy also seeks to maximize the benefits of air quality and affordability for low-income residents in areas of Portland that are the most dependent on private vehicles. Low-income people in communities of color generally live outside of Portland's central city and have less access to public transit and bike lane infrastructure. It's likely that they drive less efficient vehicles and drive longer distances to access work and services. Prioritizing electric vehicle access for low-income people in communities of color improves access to affordable transportation, improves economic opportunity, and reduces carbon emissions. The City of Portland does not currently own or maintain public charging infrastructure. We work with community partners and local utilities to encourage organizations to invest in public charging infrastructure that serve our community. Portland's local investor-owned utilities have been directed by a state Senate bill to draft transportation electrification plans. Portland General Electric has already invested in a downtown Electric Avenue, a publicly accessible electric vehicle charging pod with 4 fast chargers and 2 level 2 chargers. Both of Portland's electric utilities have future plans to invest in additional Electric Avenue charging pods, which will expand access to electric vehicle charging stations across the city. Portland is specifically working to increase access to charging in multifamily buildings and garage-free homes. Residents in multifamily dwellings have significant barriers to installing electric vehicle charging stations. City staff are currently exploring options to require new construction multifamily buildings to be EV-ready. In preparation for the exponential growth in the number of EVs that are expected to be on the streets in the next 5 to 10 years, Portland staff are working on a citywide electric vehicle charging station siting strategy that prioritizes areas of town that do not already have existing charging stations, are close to multifamily housing, people with high vehicle miles traveled reside, have less access to frequent public transit and bike routes, are near commercial centers and corridors, and are near destination areas that people tend to drive longer distances to access. Please feel free to reach out to our EV policy lead, Ingrid Fish, if you would like additional information or would like to further discuss Portland's electric vehicle strategy. And finally, from the City of Amsterdam, with an attachment, Plan Amsterdam, the Electric City. Dear Chairman Squilla, Chairman O, and members of the Joint Committee on Streets and Services and Global Opportunities and the Creative Innovative Economy. Pursuant to the aims of Resolution Number 161039, the City of Amsterdam is pleased to provide Plan Amsterdam, the Electric City, for the Joint Committee's reference. No city in the world is as far ahead in the transition to electric transport as Amsterdam. Amsterdam's extensive public network of EV charging points is the backbone for the city's ambitions in electric transport, with high visibility throughout the city and providing guaranteed charging facilities to electric drivers. In the city, it's crucial to have an effective charge point infrastructure for electric vehicles. As more than 90% of Amsterdam people do not have their own parking space, the council has to take its responsibility. Amsterdam was the first council in the Netherlands to solve the chicken and egg problem of whether to promote electric transport by providing charge points or to wait until there are actually electric cars around to use them. Amsterdam chose not to wait. On the contrary, as early as 2009, the council installed public charge points with exclusive parking spaces for electric cars across the city. This created a snowball effect. The more charge points were installed, the more electric cars appeared in the city's streets. Future owners of electric vehicles could request a charge point near their home or apply for subsidies to build a charge point on their own premises. This demand-driven approach raised confidence in the electric revolution, leading to increased numbers of residents and businesses buying electric vehicles. The Amsterdam approach became the blueprint for many other cities in the Netherlands as well as abroad. In the meantime, Amsterdam has been preparing to accommodate charging facilities for the increasing numbers of electric vehicles and exploring how to fit these in the public space. New technological developments such as battery capacity and charging times will have a large impact on future charging solutions. As Philadelphia City Council discusses possibilities for an EV charging infrastructure, it is invited to use Plan Amsterdam, the electric city, as inspiration and an example of global best practices. The City of Amsterdam continues to successfully encourage adoption of EVs, and it supports the City of Philadelphia's efforts to do the same. Kind regards, Dode Bardock, Project Manager, Public Charging Infrastructure, on behalf of Bart Verdelman, Program Manager, Air Quality and Electric Mobility.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, thanks everyone for attending today's hearing. We're going to recess this hearing to the call of the chairs and hopefully have this task force set up before our next hearing and let you know where we are and where we are going. Thank you so much. Have a great day.